what's your brand persona? So there's kind of 12 personas. There's the sage or the magician or the maverick. And you can see different brands kind of leaning into these different kind of personas.
Welcome to Compromising Positions. I'm Lianne Potter, cyber anthropologist and head of security operations for a major retailer.
And I'm Jeff Watkins, a cybersecurity enthusiast and CTO for a major tech consultancy. Together, we're the tech podcast that asks non-cybersecurity professionals what we in the industry can do to make their lives easier
and help make our organisations more prepared to face ever-changing human-centric cyber threats.
Lianne, I once heard you say during a talk that the cybersecurity team have a PR problem.
Yep, I really think we do, and we're seen as business blockers to a lot of people or the workplace, and it's not a good look, especially when there are so many cybersecurity teams doing such great and collaborative work in organisations. But once you've had a bad experience with a cybersecurity team, you tend to bring those preconceptions with you to your next organisation. So I thought, cybersecurity has a PR problem. How about we get a real PR specialist in to help us va-va-voom our image? So enter stage left, Sarah Evans, our guest for this week.
Great idea. Sarah Evans joins us this week as the head of digital PR from Energy PR. She has over 12 years of experience in SEO, digital PR, digital marketing, content and social media. In this episode, Can Cybersecurity Overcome its PR problem? Building your brand and social capital, we're going to learn how to target your cybersecurity message for maximum effect, how to rebuild your team's image, learn what marketing and PR really think about cybersecurity, and learn how to be prepared during a public cybersecurity incident with a 101 on crisis comms.
And how we should be less of a cybersecurity hero and more like the wise cybersecurity sage as we deep dive into brand personas.
Perception is everything if you want to get people on board with securing your estate. So sit back and enjoy this episode with Sarah Evans.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Our absolute pleasure. So tell our audience who might not be quite familiar with what a PR person does.
We work with a really huge mix of business to business to consumer brands, and we work on their digital PR, their comms strategy, their audience analysis. So depending on the brand and their comms challenge, it can really vary the kind of work that we do for them. So for example, at Energy, we always start with the audience because that's the best way to make the most of your budget and make sure that, because a lot of marketers now are doing more, having to do more with less resources, less time, less budget. It's all about being effective. So we need to know who we're talking to. PR used to be about just getting your brand's name in the FT or some of these really huge titles that everyone used to read, the nationals. But the media is so fragmented now. There are so many more titles you could appear in. So if you start with the audience, then you know exactly where you need to place your content and where you need to get in front of them. If you keep your eye on the audience, you can follow them wherever they go, and that way you always get the best result. But it's all about meeting them where they are with a message that resonates and that is meaningful to them. It's not just about you as a business. So we help brands navigate what they're interested in, what the media are talking about, and what their audience care about.
And I think it's so important to approach it in that way because, posed in a way, it's a bit like the age-old problem that I face as a cybersecurity professional, which is, in my remit, I'm supposed to cover people, process, and technology. But really, quite a lot of the industry focus is just on the technology part, and that people element is actually the whole foundational piece that gets you to where you need to be. And I imagine the sort of PR industry, especially a few years back, it was very technology-led in like, which is the latest social media platform do we need to jump on to be a part of it? Because if we don't go onto the latest trends, we're not going to be there. But taking it back to that audience piece of, as you said, meet them where they are, bring the content to them. The actual platform itself doesn't really matter, but it's actually the quality and the content and making sure that it's not just a one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And because there are so many platforms now, you can't afford to follow them everywhere. How AI will influence that? Well, some people seem to think it's going to change the world, and other people think it's a bit slower to adopt. And I think it'll probably end up netting out somewhere in the middle, because there are people who are using AI to streamline processes and do some of the kind of initial legwork and save them time on the more kind of functional day-to-day tasks like keyword research or sentiment analysis, maybe even like ideation in the very first instance. But at the moment, there's still, and I think there probably will always require a human intervention, first of all at the briefing stage, and then also to filter the output so that it's kind of fit for human consumption at the other end of it, essentially. So prompts and, the brief that you give it, the output will only be as good as that. So that's really going to inform how effective we're able to make use, because AI is just another tool in our toolkit. Essentially, it's not going to do any of the kind of creative strategic roles that makes PR and meaningful marketing so brilliant. Actually, I can completely get the draw of it for brands that are short on resource, short on time, to just get it to do a load of copywriting or something like that. But if everyone has access to the same tools, then everyone's content, the media is going to be flooded with all this mediocre content.
Have you heard that term, the zombie internet? Theory is that the internet died a couple of years ago, but in reality, like bot and generated content by next year will be more than real content, which is scary.
Wow, that doesn't surprise me, but it's horrifying all the same.
If I'm going to set up, for example, a security awareness program, ChatGPT could be an amazing tool to kind of help me generate content. But what would your suggestion be if me as a security person was going to start doing that? How do I actually use that so I'm not just generating quite pap content, really, or content that's just literally copied and pasted from everywhere else off the internet?
This is a really great question, because it is all about what you tell it to do. And prompts and creating prompts is almost becoming the next kind of art form, akin to coding or something. Because I heard the other day that someone thought there's going to be a renaissance of adjectives and how we brief the thing, because that really bears heavily on what the quality of the output. So what I would do is, I think, just have a play as well, because sometimes these things can feel really big and nefarious, but actually once you start to use it, you get a bit more comfortable with it and familiar with it. But I would strongly suggest using it for ideation, perhaps even content planning, a content calendar, but always have human eyes on the output before it goes anywhere, and edit it so that you're happy. But also make sure that it's edited by or reviewed by a subject matter expert, because especially with ChatGPT in particular, it's not a truth teller. It's essentially a language model. So it's kind of identifying the probability of which words come next rather than what's factually correct. So it's very convincing. It's a fluent bullshit, and it can sound exactly like, if you didn't know much about the topic, oh yeah, that sounds about right. Just be wary of that.
Chat GPT for Prime Minister. On the topic there of creating content for cyber teams, I mean, what has been your experience in the past of actually working with cybersecurity teams? Have you seen any challenges, and what's been good about those interactions?
Yes. So I used to work in financial services, and I would say that's probably the strictest environment I've worked at in terms of cybersecurity. My path crossed most cybersecurity teams. I think being in digital marketing, the relationship between us and the cybersecurity team, they probably thought of us as some kind of wayward teenager that's really frivolous, and, because there are so many new digital tools and software and things that we need to be kind of testing and practicing, we probably look quite reckless. But to us, they would look like they were kind of being almost performatively obtuse. And in some instances, in an extreme example, they wanted to close down access to our Google Analytics, it would just mean that we were working completely blind. And so I think it comes down to, and without wanting to make sweeping generalizations, I think the nature of cybersecurity, you need to be thoughtful, understand the detail, and be kind of really pragmatic and rational. And in kind of creative marketing world, you're like, oh, shiny thing, and you're all about ideas, and like, oh god, don't clip my wings with all that detail. And so it's actually the way that I've worked best with them is when you actually speak to them and work together, so you understand each other's objectives. So ultimately, the cybersecurity team would say, well, don't you realize when you just sign up for all these digital tools and software that haven't been vetted by us, you're actually opening the door to these risks, and these are the consequences of what could happen. And then we need to get them to be willing to understand what we're trying to do. So actually, we're not doing it for the love of needing to keep track of 20 different passwords. We're doing it because we're trying to reduce cost per lead, or because we're trying to make our marketing more effective. We're trying to measure what's working and what's not, so that we can do more of that and put the budget in the right place. So I think it's all about those common goals. So we need to do that as quickly as possible, so that we have a competitive edge, or so that we're making the most of every sale. So our website doesn't crash, and we're optimizing the journey, all those kinds of things. So it's okay, well, why don't we then come up with a plan that keeps you happy, but enables me to do what I need to do as quickly as possible? Because then I won't have to avoid you at the coffee machine.
Absolutely. And when you mentioned that had trouble just accessing analytics for someone who does your job, but my face was a look of horror. Can't believe that someone said that to you. And again, it's just down to that misunderstanding, that huge misunderstanding piece about, what you do in your job. And actually,
Yeah.
yes, cybersecurity is incredibly important. I do care what the banks are doing with my money. Totally get it. However, the primary reason that place exists is to make money, and you are a huge part of that. And if you are enabling the business to make money, then maybe I'll get a bonus as a cybersecurity professional. Things just that kind of that lack of understanding, that business acumen, I think, is one of the biggest collaboration killers between cybersecurity teams and other areas of the business. And I think it's because we're not a revenue generating function that it's hard for us to kind of think in those terms, even though all the textbooks say that the goal of the cybersecurity team is to be business enablers, but it doesn't translate when we sort of face risks in that way.
Yeah, and the digital sphere probably is just one big risk for cybersecurity. So it's actually just going back to the different ways that we work, understanding that of each other. I almost need to go to the cybersecurity team and say, okay, what information do you need from me to prove that I'm not being frivolous about this, that this is something that has been thought through and that you're comfortable enough with. I'm not going to say fully comfortable, because is that possible? I don't really know. And then equally, they can have access to all these different ideas and like what they're facilitating by working with me on it.
I guess, what do you think the cybersecurity team misunderstand about what you do in your function?
I think purely based on personal experience, I think they don't understand the rigor and the thought and the strategy that goes behind marketing, because it's actually, when you're doing it as you want to do it, it is a very thoughtful process. You need to know who you're targeting, what channels you're targeting those people on. But then it's also, we need to unlock budget. And in order to do that, we need to prove that what we're doing is going to work. So there's competitor analysis, there's meeting your audience where they are, which we've talked about, there's content creation, and there's never enough people to do everything you want to do. So you're looking to streamline processes as quickly as possible. But then also, it probably does sound frivolous, especially when I was working in financial services, doing their social media, to have Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn open. Most of the departments didn't even have access to that. It was purely marketing that had kind of a special dispensation to be able to access these things. It's like that we need to understand all that, because that's where our audiences are. That's where they're seeing us. That's where we're interacting with them. That's where a lot of customer service was happening. So I think it's, on the face of it, it might seem frivolous, but there's actually quite a lot of rigor that goes behind what we're doing and why.
I always have to wonder about, and I understand that, especially, banks do need to have a good security posture. I'd rather they didn't lose all our money. That's But sometimes I think that the restrictions go too far. I think, Lianne, you mentioned discussing YouTube being blocked at one organisation. And, well, actually, people, especially in software engineering, quite often use that as a resource for learning and development. And I'm hoping that maybe sentiment has moved on from YouTube being entirely frivolous. Sure, you could spend 8 hours of the day watching Minecraft tutorials, but there's also a load of other really good things you can be doing with it. And I think blocking the public-facing media of a large organisation, I think it feels kind of counterintuitive.
Yeah, I agree.
The whole social media thing is definitely a weird kind of grey area with sort of HR and stuff like that. But it's also such a great collaboration tool with your other colleagues as well. And if you really want to try and build a culture amongst yourselves, and you have if you have a company Facebook page but you don't allow people to access it, what are you doing there? Or a company LinkedIn page, what are you doing? It doesn't make any sense.
Or even there would be some websites that would be blocked. So we would get this piece of media coverage that might go out to everyone and say, oh, look, we've got featured in this title, and 80% of the organisation can't actually read it. But before we move on from the HR point, because I think that is really interesting, it's almost masking the broader problem, which is trust. Because if you've got someone watching Minecraft videos for 10 hours a day, it's not the fact that he can access it, it's the fact that why doesn't he want to do his job, and who's not keeping an eye on him?
Yeah, exactly. It's a supervision issue, isn't it? It's not a security issue. If you're not using those tools, your competitors are anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, the assumption is that you're, from cybersecurity teams maybe, is that you're using all this top secret confidential data, putting it out there.
So there's so many different tools that we might use, and I think potentially it's whether the tool is built or hosted data on a platform that they don't have sight of or control over, that's potentially a risk, especially any tool that's going to host any form of customer data. They would obviously want sight of that, and I would completely understand that. Then there would be other tools that might just host non-identifiable analytics data, for example, which is where the team that wanted to veto Google was coming from. It's a cloud-based service, they would say. Therefore, we don't approve. And then there's other tools which would be completely benign in terms of identifiable information or sensitive data or competitive data, but they might be open source or something like that they might just not understand them, which, I mean, it could be any and all of those, especially with digital tools. They're popping up all the time, and some of them don't have a very good lifespan. Other ones evolve and endure. And you pay for them. And if you pay enough for them, then you get your own account manager and you have contracts, and it's a lot more buttoned down, and security teams are a lot more comfortable with that. But it's kind of the little startup ones that pop up and you're like, oh, you get this for free. Or it looks at audience data in a slightly different way, or it does social listening, or it does even scheduling posts on LinkedIn. There's a little tool for everything. And I guess it just starts to feel a little bit unwieldy if you've got all of these kind of stacking up. So it's ideal to have a tech stack that's approved, that you've got contracts for and you've got account managers for, that help you manage and make the most of these tools. But budgets often don't allow for that. So there's the kind of trade-off, I guess.
And I think it's about having that conversation, isn't it? Because you said, it's overwhelming. It all stacks up eventually. There's all these tools. Of course, the automatic reaction is going to be, yep, I'm not going to let you do anything. It's very self-preservationist to do that. However, if there's a further conversation you can have instead about, actually, these are the guardrails. And so if it does this and this and this, you need to have a conversation with us. However, if you're just doing this and this, then you don't need to come and contact us about it. And I think that would be a better way of approaching this.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really good point, especially because you don't want to invite many, many, many conversations every time there's something that wants to be onboarded or even tested. The other thing is that I think training is an important part of it, because some people are probably using fluidly personal and work devices as one. When I first when I was doing my social media job, I had a work phone that had everything work on it, and it was IT approved, and but now devices are one and the same. So actually mistakes could be made, or people may not realize that sort of information doesn't go in a platform like that. I think Google Docs is probably a really good example, because it's so much easier to use than something like SharePoint, or at least it was when I was flitting between the two. But then it might not be safe for maybe not reasons of cybersecurity, but maybe something like compliance or auditing or something like that. So yeah, I think the education and the conversation, and also knowing that there will be a conversation rather than just a no, is really important.
Absolutely. Kind of building upon that, one thing I've said a lot when I've done public speaking is that cybersecurity has a real PR problem. And I thought, let's put my money where my mouth is and actually bring on a PR specialist onto the podcast. I think we have a PR problem because we're always the team that found saying no, like you say. I've heard nicknames being described as, the Department of No, the Department of Work Prevention, kind of being bandied about, things like that. So we don't go out and endear ourselves to our colleagues. We call them stupid if they click on links, for example. And the language in general is not very inclusive. There are things like insider threat, weakest link, and use terms like least privilege and zero trust, are all building up to really give us a really bad PR problem. Where do you start to change their image?
I love this question. I think based on the goals of everyone needing to understand cybersecurity to a certain degree, I think it does matter that there's a kind of quote unquote PR problem in cybersecurity. But when you think about some of the storytelling that's possible with something like cybersecurity, it can be made to be really exciting and really, if you think about all the films that have been made about like cyber threats, and obviously it doesn't make a good story if all the threats don't come to fruition, because then everything's just normal. But
I can attest that cybersecurity professionals will be saying the same thing. Don't want an incident to happen, don't get me wrong,
yes.
touch wood.
Yeah.
However, it would be a very boring career if nothing did happen.
It's better when it happens to the competition directly, because it gives you more budget without having to answer to the ICO or anybody.
Yes, every sector needs a cautionary tale. That's how you unlock the budget. But in terms of where we'd start with a client that has a problem with their image, I think one of the first exercises that we would do is some kind of soul searching around, okay, well, your image is not where you want it to be. Where would you like it to be? You know, let's start defining what success looks like for you in terms of how you're perceived. And that's when, well, actually, we would probably go even a step back from that and say, who are the people that you are trying to influence and what do you want them to think? Therefore, what's important to them? People aren't wandering around thinking about brands all the time. They're just not, no matter how easy it is to kind of get consumed with that thought when you're in-house or even in an agency working for brands. So actually, what's that point of connection? What do you want this person to think about you? And then this is the really fun part, because that's when you start to workshop different ideas. Things like, what's your brand persona? So there's kind of 12 personas. There's the sage or the magician or the maverick. And you can see different brands kind of leaning into these different kind of personas. I guess with cybersecurity, you might want to be considered as the trusted sage, where the emotional benefits for the customer are things like safety, control. You don't want a kind of Harley Davidson maverick to take you on this kind of reckless journey. You want that security, that, you know, the emotional benefits. You are in control and nothing bad's going to happen. I'm going to take care of you. You're in good hands. Just chill.
That's flashed so many images of some kind of beer swilling, motorcycle, leather clad cybersecurity team rolling up saying, cybersecurity, shit's going to get real. Maybe it's not what you want. I guess, so there's that brand persona there. You talk about, you say there's sort of the mage or the sage there, kind of somebody who's wise and all-knowing. And are there any other fundamentals that you think would be useful for if you were to have a distinctive brand for something like a cybersecurity function? Are there any other fundamental elements you'd put in place?
Yeah, absolutely. So defining who you are as a brand is just the first step, because then actually, how are you going to communicate that? You need to make sure that your actions ladder up into that. You can't just say that you're really cool and then not give anyone any proof that you are. You have to.
Oh, Sarah, build a whole career on that.
Yeah, so you know, people need to see you walk the walk, and so you can workshop exactly how those kinds of behaviors show up. So if you want to be trusted, how does that show up in behaviors, and how doesn't it is equally important to prove, to kind of quantify the do's and don'ts. You know, what are your values, and how do you prove that you are what you say you are? How does that show up in your comms, your tone of voice, your relationships, your goals? So with things like a cybersecurity team, if collaboration was a key part of the brand persona, that you know, in 6-12 months time, if I did a survey of all the people, of all your key stakeholders, what 3 words would they use to describe you? If you want collaborative to be one of them, what are the steps you need to do in between now and then to make sure that happens? Would it be every person in the cybersecurity team has a business function that they partner with, and then bring all that knowledge back to the cybersecurity team, and making sure that you're facilitating, not blocking, you know, all those kinds of things. Brand personas can sound quite like lofty and abstract. Actually, it's really how they flow through into behaviors and how you show up that matters.
I love that piece as an exercise. That would be an excellent thing to kind of sit down with the
Yeah.
team and say, you know, what 3 words would you like people to use to describe you? And it can be very sort of metric driven in a way. And I mean metric driven is in qualitative rather than quantitative, obviously, but just helping you really aim for something rather than just being, oh, I just want to be liked and I just want people to stop clicking things. It makes it a lot more tangible. Would you do that activity as sitting around, getting everyone together, kind of spitballing ideas, or how do you really tease down into that?
So I think it's important to do the exercise that incorporates all different learning styles and styles of communication, because definitely a workshop is always a good thing. When it comes to stuff like this, because you can bounce off each other. But what I would typically do is probably give a brief out maybe 3 or 4 days in advance, so that the thinkers that don't necessarily like to come up with ideas on the spot have the chance to lecture it over and then bring stuff to the meeting. There's also lots of stimulus that you can bring to sessions like that to really get people excited and get creative and really think outside of your immediate kind of sphere of reference, especially if you're in cybersecurity or finance or something that's not very tangible. It can be helpful to bring in really exciting examples of what other brands are doing, so that you can, you know, how might, if we were going to be the adventurer, how might that show up? So things like that, and then making sure that all of that's captured. And then it's probably not, if it was an exercise for me as an individual doing a kind of personal development plan, then I would decide mine. But if you're looking at a team, then it's probably best that everyone's bought into the process, therefore they're invested in seeing through the outcomes, but maybe getting everyone to kind of buy into or subscribe to, this is what we're doing as a team.
You mentioned earlier about the power of storytelling for some of this as well, and I think cybersecurity, because it's living right on the edge of when it goes wrong, it goes very, very wrong, and it's entertaining, stroke terrifying sometimes, and so it has the potential for quite a lot of, I'd say, some fantastic stories, and maybe some of the wins as well. But we don't often use storytelling as a tool very effectively. How would you go about telling a good cybersecurity story?
Well, every good story has a hero. The hero is not going to be cybersecurity, but you're facilitating something. You're kind of the mentor that makes something happen. But and for the hero, what is the enemy? What are they struggling against? So you need to define that as well. What's the enemy? Is it a data breach? Is it complacency as the enemy? And you can really dramatize that and think, okay, if the hero is your audience, and in cybersecurity's case, it might be employees at that particular organization, how can the hero be facilitated along this journey to navigate things like complacency and attacks and end up coming out on top? We all love that kind of narrative arc, but thinking about what all good stories have, they have a hero you can really get behind. You have their mentor / kind of companion that takes them along that journey and guides them through, and then you have the dragon that they slay. But in real terms, not Harry Potter or Star Wars. It could just be as simple as what's relatable. You need to pull emotions into it, because humans love stories. That's the thing that will supersede AI and algorithms, is actually just stories that are creative, that take you somewhere. Stories help people remember important things. People remember how you make them feel, not just, a process. It really brings things to life, especially things that are abstract or arbitrary, that are quite conceptual. Something like cybersecurity, where it can feel like this impenetrable monolith over there that's like, oh, I'm just gonna ignore it, because actually that's much easier than trying to find a route in that I can understand. That's why I think stories can be really powerful with cybersecurity, because actually, if this happens, these are the implications. This is how it might affect you. You dramatize the problem and dramatize the solution. It's going to stick with people much more, I think.
Storytelling is incredibly important. Storytelling is the reason why we're all here today. It enabled us, as we were sat around the fire after we'd spent the day hunting gathering,
Yes.
to be able to educate each other. And it was to educate people in a way that not only was it entertaining, it built bonds, but it was also informative. It helps you prepare yourself for the next day to be able to tackle the next threats you were facing. And so getting that storytelling element right is so incredibly important for building up relationships, building up literally a tribe, which is what you really need when you're facing things like cybersecurity threats. It's incredibly important that it's everyone in this together to face those threats. And when you were talking about cybersecurity, you were not the heroes of this story. I think some of our listeners might feel a bit bristly about that, actually, because for quite a long time, that is the role we have been painting ourselves in. We want to be the saviors of the organization. And I wonder if a little bit, I might be diving into the realms of psychology here, is a little bit of that kind of, when something goes right, I want to be the one people laud and say, oh, he stopped this really bad thing from happening. But when things go wrong, I want to be the one that says, well, you didn't listen to me, therefore it's your fault, and finger wagging. And so when you said cybersecurity teams are not the heroes of the story, it made me think about all the other cybersecurity engagements I've been a part of as a recipient. I haven't always worked in cybersecurity. That narrative actually is more prominent of them being the hero. Just let us know, we'll protect you. However, that takes away your autonomy as an individual.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's disempowering because it means you're shielding them from making the mistakes. I love your point around relationships and bonding, and that's why stories are really important. And I think it is confronting to say to anybody you're not the hero of your story, but it's probably a really essential adjustment in the thinking, because you're not. You've got a goal that you're trying to get to, and by talking about yourself and projecting yourself as the protagonist in this story is not the best way to get the other person to engage.
Absolutely. And going further into that as well. And I have seen this change quite a lot recently. Security awareness programs are becoming much more of a prevalent thing as an actual capability and function within the cybersecurity team, rather than just a little bit of part of someone's job. And the narrative used to be quite predominantly, it's our people. They're the ones ones that are the enemy here. They're the ones. Christian Hunt described it as the naughty children that are ruining the dining set. And that narrative is changing, slowly. I did an exam today, and actually one of the questions was, our people are our weakest link, yes or no? And I was like, oh, I know what the right answer is for this exam, but I know that's not actually the right answer here. And the answer to get the question right was, yes, they are the weakest part of an organization. And it made me really, really mad that this was on the exam. And I think when you're starting to attribute characterization to this storytelling piece, just be mindful that if you're going out there into the world to put out that laurel branch and say, come and talk to me, I'm nice, I'm friendly, don't go out there and start saying, but you're the enemy, you know that, don't you, right?
Yeah, I was thinking as you were talking that if I'm talking to someone who's trying to get me to do something, but they're also calling me the weakest link, I kind of don't want to do that thing just out of principle. Now, that's not how you get the best out of me.
Exactly. And I think a lot of it is down to respect, which brings me on to my next question. So again, it's maybe a bit more of an anthropological question, but why is social capital important? And how do we go about gaining a bit more of that?
Great. Yeah. It's influence, and it's building. If we're all pulling in the same direction, we're going to get further. It's understanding how our roles. You're having to show willing in order to get that back in respect, in collaboration and connection. So I think building social capital is really important, especially when the people that you're trying to influence and build relationships with are within your own business and not necessarily customers. I think it's even more important then, because ultimately, if you don't have that, when something goes wrong, you're in quite a precarious position then, because you're having to build all that from scratch. The first time marketing and cybersecurity people clash might be when there's a security breach, and then all of a sudden cybersecurity are having to consider each other when they don't understand each other's goals, how they work together, or even what are the best next steps.
And it reminds me a little bit of, when you're building your own personal brand and they say, start networking right now. Not when you need it and may need to find a job or anything like that. Start networking before you actually need anything from someone else, because you don't do that up front. Then when you do need it, you're not going to be able to leverage that network. And I think that's really what you're saying there was really important about the necessity of building these relationships up front, because in the heat of the moment, when there's a breach happening or, there's a clash, like you say, or anything like that, you want to already have goodwill with people, don't you?
Yes.
On both sides.
Yeah, because then you feel like you're in it together, as opposed to, like you said earlier, Lianne, trying to just cover your own back and say, oh, it wasn't me. It must have been that department over there. And nothing good happens, especially when you're in crisis mode. No one's their best self. So you need to already know how you can work together to have the best outcome overall.
I guess in crisis mode, one of the biggest PR disasters around at the moment is things around cyber incidents, and there's been quite a few really high profile ones recently. Can you maybe give us some of your insight into your experience with crisis comms?
Yes. I'm laughing because they are a very, very high pressured situation. So yes, there was an instance with an accounting firm that was a client that had possibly the worst happen, or a lot of businesses' worst nightmare, which is Russian software stole all of their data, shut down their systems. And that's a huge problem, especially with something like finance, where there's a lot of sensitive data, internal stakeholders as well. So lots of partners that all had strong opinions, some more informed than others. But essentially, the PR job to do in an instance like that is to immediately gather everyone that needs to know. So all the key people internally, and get everyone on the same page with the same message. And this might be this is where the art comes in, because from a cybersecurity or a technical point of view, X has happened, but the implications of that are what need to be translated in a way that's honest, transparent enough. The outside world or the clients don't need to know the ins and outs of everything. They need to know the implications. They need to know what's being done about it and what the risk is. You don't want to say too much and then have to row back from it later. Like, it's okay, we're doing this and it'll be sorted by tomorrow. You don't want to put yourself in that position. Equally, you don't want to set off alarm bells, and you don't want there to be a vacuum of silence, because then speculation fills that, and then that's really hard to row back from.
Yeah, there's sort of all these things around things like responsible disclosure and sort of necessary and sufficient information, making sure you don't give too much away to actually further expose potentially people impacted by it as well. I guess, how do you prepare for those kinds of comms? Do you have any kind of war games you run yourself on crisis comm?
I have actually heard about some simulation software that kind of everyone's on a laptop and you actually act out a crisis, and then a tweet happens, and then, and it can be, even though it's simulation, it can be very, very stressful. It gets the adrenaline going for sure. The best way to prepare for that for a business would be to possibly have a think about what's likely to happen. Definitely one of the key things would be who is in that circle of trust, who needs to know, and what's the process and procedure that needs to happen. So the nature of the crisis will dictate things like how frequently they need to regroup and things like that. But essentially things like all external comms stops unless it's from these people, or you gather everyone that's customer facing together and say, and this is your key messaging. You do not deviate from this until you're told that you can. That way you don't have someone going, oh, you'll never guess what, we've been hacked, versus someone that's you want everyone singing off the same hymn sheet. So the comms protocols need to be really clear. At the same time, you also have to quickly decide what to do.
I guess the point at which you're in the territory of you're having to do some reputation management when things starts to get very real. Do you have any tips around how to actually do reputation management? Well, I guess there's 2 points, kind of externally, but also if you're the cybersecurity department, how do you do reputation management?
You talk to your PR team. So you do just need the comms bridge between, because a lot of technical language could set alarm bells off and have people worrying, but actually you just need to know that the implications are X. I think you do need to carefully choose the language that you use in order to take emotion out of it. But I think this is where the cybersecurity team can really shine, because you could say when things go really wrong, people want the best team on it. We've got our cybersecurity experts are working on this right now. So you need to demonstrate action that you're doing something about it, reassure people, and there's even some benefit in kind of normalizing it to say this kind of thing happens sometimes. It's not because we're incompetent, it's because the businesses are exposed to this type of risk. However, this is what we're doing about it. And the cybersecurity team can help the comms team kind of hone that message to almost take the air out of it. So this is what's happened. It means this. Say no more. But it's also important to know different levels of, who needs to know what. So employees might need to know this level of information. The clients also need to have a certain amount of information, especially if they're directly affected. And you probably wouldn't want to do any external comms beyond that at all if it's a cyber security breach proactively. So the circle of trust for cybersecurity breaches are as small as possible. So yeah, you keep external comms to a minimum. So be secretive but transparent, a balance.
It's very much a balance. And I think I'm really pleased that you highlighted something there, which I think is often neglected, particularly when we do tabletop simulations, is what's the comms we're going to say to our employees? How much do we say, okay, right, we're going to tell you what's happened, but blanket ban, you can't talk about it, we're keeping this in-house. And there's that very kind of careful game there of how much you reveal even internally as well, without eroding any trust as well that you have there. If you're working in that environment and you can see everyone flapping, something's up. So you need reassuring just as much as your customers do.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Final question, because you've been so generous with your time.
Well, it's flown, hasn't it?
It has, yeah. It's been great. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Final question is, do you think that our listeners, they have a PR team, which I'm sure they probably do? What should they do tomorrow to reach out to them without them thinking, oh, am I in trouble? Why is the security team reaching out to me?
Yes. Oh, that's a lovely question. I think one of the questions, maybe they could just ask a couple of questions like, what are you working on at the moment and how can I help you? Or like, what are your blockers? I think just showing an interest, their objectives and how they might feed into that would start an amazing virtuous cycle of goodwill. Because usually if people are taking an interest in your objectives and how they can help, it will come back to you because they'll want to know the same thing. It just starts that conversation and it starts that common understanding that you need to get the best out of each other.
I love that. One thing I'd really like to encourage also the cybersecurity listeners on this show is to perhaps go up to the PR team and say, I'd like to share some good news stories about what we're doing around security. Something that we can really sell to our customers internally and externally, that we're doing security in a way that builds trust as well. And we don't shout about our wins very often. And I think that's something that the PR team could really help us get out of our shell a little bit and be a bit more vocal about our wins.
Yes, definitely. Especially when it comes to things like new technology and things that a cybersecurity team might not think is an exciting story. The external world probably would. And it's likely that your competitors aren't really doing that. that. So why not?
Why not indeed? Yeah, I think that'd be really good. I think that would be really a nice way to turn something that can be very doom and gloom into something exciting, innovative, and maybe we can have a little bit of shine like the PR team does. Well, Sarah, I think this conversation is amazing. I've learned so much. I am definitely going to do the 3 words, how I want to be, how I want the team to be represented. I'm going to take that back to my organization straight away. I think that's a really powerful. If you're going to do anything tomorrow, that's what you do. Particularly, I really do feel like the brand of cybersecurity, both within organizations and externally to non-cybersecurity people, is fraught. Quite a lot of senses. There's some organizations, people doing it really, really well. Don't get me wrong, they make it look incredibly sexy and great. Brilliant relationships with their customers, both internally and externally. But the vast majority, as we've seen on this podcast, we ask the same question all the time. What's your experience been like with cybersecurity teams? The experience is quite similar across the board. And the whole purpose of this podcast has been to understand how do we change perceptions. So it made perfect sense to me to get someone like yourself in to help us build our brand image. So thank you kindly. You have definitely, in my opinion, met the brief of this podcast. I'm very, very glad that you came and joined us. If people want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
I'm on LinkedIn, of course. So yeah, that's probably the best place. Or you can come to our website and say hello there, which is energypr.co.uk. And thank you so much for having me.
I wonder if cyber teams maybe should actually hire PR firms themselves, actually get ahead of the competition and start actually doing their own PR.
Wouldn't that be a strength? Yeah, that would be a really good way to stand out.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it as well.
Where have all the good admins gone and where are all the logs? I need a hero. I'm holding out for a cybersecurity ally. And they've gotta be savvy and they've gotta not click and they've gotta know when it's a fish. Do 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 do. Do 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 do.
Well, quite.
Sorry, I really had to get that out of my system. I love this chat, although in all honesty, it's going to be really tough to shed my maverick image from this.
Well, it's not that tough when it's all in your head.
So cheeky. But in all seriousness though, it's quite freeing not to have to be the hero in the cybersecurity story.
It makes perfect sense too, because letting other people be the hero in protecting the organisation you work for is more practical, and it's all about that pragmatic approach. Put more stock in people making the right decisions about cybersecurity, give them some more autonomy, and if they don't know what the right decision is, then hopefully you've built up enough social capital that they will come to you as the wise sage.
Think of me as your cyber Yoda. I'm quite happy with this ending.
We hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you like the show, please do leave us a review and share far and wide. It really helps us spread the word and introduce those ideas to a growing audience of cybersecurity professionals.
Shall I sing us out?
No, maybe next time.
Okay, well, see you next time. Keep secure and don't forget to ask yourself, am I the compromising position here?